Hello, my name is Ran, and today we're going to look at navigation meshes and how to create a simple point and click character using them. So you'll see here straight away we've got this green sort of like overlay on our map, and that's what a nav mesh looks like. So it's basically telling the character movement inside our player, where he can move and where he can't move. So it's based off of a collision in the world. The way this is made is using a Nav Mesh Bounds volume from inside the volumes drop down on the left hand side of our viewport, and there's a Nav Mesh Bounds volume here, and you literally just drag it into the world and you scale it to go over your map. But I'm going to show you a few of the problems that we come across when we do this just straight off from giving it a go, right? So I've gone and deleted everything from the map except the player. So here's my level, and then I drag a Nav Mesh volume in, so it's Nav Mesh Bounds volume. So I drag that over the top of this, scale it up a little, and then at the top underneath build, if I build paths, you'll notice that nothing gets built straight away. So in order to fix this, well, one of the things that the Nav Mesh volume does is it actually faces downwards, so all the navigation is going to get drawn on top of this face here. So what we want to do is rotate this map first. So now if I go and generate paths again, we'll see if anything pops up. Right, so one of the reasons this is because it's too small. So if I scale this up by say 4 or 5 times its size, and then I'll need to scale the nav mesh with that. So see, now it starts to generate these chunks, but you'll see that it doesn't really match the map. So the first problem is that the map's too small, because it is like 16 pixels wide for each of these little blocks, and the nav mesh is essentially raycasting downwards, and trying to find out how to draw this on such a small area doesn't work, so you have to scale it all up, which means that you're going to have to scale your character up and change the movement speeds and the capsule collider and all that sort of stuff. So we've scaled this up a bit, but we're still not getting desired results. So one of the things that we can do is go into the project settings. On the left hand side we've got navigation mesh, and you've got a drop down called generation, and we can change the cell size, cell height, radius and height, all these things. So if I change these to be like 8, 4, 8, and then there's another one at the bottom called max simplification area. So the lower this is, the less simplified it becomes. So simplified, i.e. How much the chunks sort of merge into one, and they can cause like errors. So well, there you go. You'll see now that this is actually filling up a decent sort of area of the map. The next thing that we can do is double check inside. On the right hand side we've got these recast nav mesh defaults. I think having 2 probably isn't good, so I'll delete one of those. I'll grab another one of them, and you'll see here that the agent radius didn't actually change. So if I change that to 8, this is actually taking up a nicer area, sort of sorting out our nav mesh a lot better. So I'll move my player to get on top of this grid. I make sure he's on the right layer in terms of the tile map layers. And the next thing that I want to do is actually code the movement for this player. So inside the player I've created a simple tick function which asks if he's got any velocity, changes flipbook to the run animation. If not, he's just going to be idle. And then I've got this left mouse button click. So if I delete this stuff here, and we'll create this from scratch, but what we can do is we can right click, type in left mouse button. So that's the event for the left mouse button. You don't have to dictate that in your project settings if you don't want to. Otherwise you can go to input, you can actually add it as an action mapping, but you can also just type in like input E and just get the keys for the things that you want. In this instance we're just going to get the left mouse button, and then we want to use the nav mesh. So one of the ways we can use the nav mesh is using a simple move to actor or move to location. So we're going to be picking a location based on the mouse position. So if I get a simple move to location, we'll have this controller and a goal as inputs for the simple move to location. So the controller is going to be simply get controller inside the graph. So that gets the player controller or the AI controller. So From here we can tell it to use simple move to location, and then it just needs a goal. So what we've got is a little function here that says get the player controller, get the hit under the mouse cursor, break the vector, and get the XY values, and set the Z value to be equal to the position of the player, and then set that as an out position. So if I drag that into the graph, the way we can make these is if I start making maths, for example, like this operator here, you drag over some nodes and you can right click them and collapse them to a macro, and then inside that macro you can tell the outputs to have an output of, say, the float that's inside here. So this could do a load of math similar to the mouse position. And then back in our event graph, you'll see now that we just get the node, so it's basically a collapsed set of maths. So we're getting this mouse position and we're telling the controller to move to it. So that's really all we need to do for basic mouse movement. So now if I click into my world, I'll actually notice that it's not moving. So one of the things I did notice actually was a little bit of testing off camera, was that this recast Nav Mesh Volume needs to be 32 minimum by the look of things. And you'll see now that the gaps in here are still kind of tiny. So maybe if I change the cell size to be slightly smaller, we'll get a little bit better accuracy. But I don't want this to be too complex, so what I'll do instead is actually scale this map up again, maybe to 8 by 8. So this is still at 32, but we have large areas to move through. So now when I click, the character just tries to move to the location. He uses the navigation mesh to dodge any collision, and that's just a simple way of making a point and click controller. So another thing that I want to show you is mouse over events. So if I stop this, back in my player there's an event on begin play that shows the cursor, so I'm going to stop that from happening. So now when I press play, I shouldn't see my cursor. Now when I press play, the mouse is automatically there. And this basically just means that we're still in the editor view, so if we just click, that'll disappear. And now we can't see the mouse, but we're able to move because the mouse is somewhere on that screen. It's just not being drawn. So what we'll do is we'll draw our own mouse and we'll look at mouse over events. So back in our content browser, if I right click, create a user interface UMG element and call this cursor. And inside this cursor, I'm going to set this to a custom size of 16 by 16. And I'm going to need to import some images for this. So in the content browser again, let's import 2 images. So I've just imported 2 styles of mouse cursor. If I right click these, go to asset actions and bulk edit via property matrix, I'll be able to change the settings of both of them at the same time. So in the level of detail drop down in the texture group, I'm going to set this to UI, so it uses the UI, and in the mipmap settings I'm going to tell it to use no mipmaps. So that means that it doesn't matter how far or close we are to that object, it's not going to change the rendering of it. So once we've done that, we can close that down and we can start adding it into our widget. So the way I'm going to control this widget for mouse over events is there's going to be a widget switcher, and it's going to switch every time we go over something that we want to show the hand, and change back every time we want to just show the cursor. So I'm going to replace this canvas panel with a widget switcher. Then inside that widget switcher, I'm going to have 2 images. So the first image is going to be in the brush. It's going to be the cursor default. So there's the default cursor, and then in the other image, it's going to be the cursor hand. There. So now you'll notice straight away when I click on each of these images, because it's inside a widget switcher, the widget switcher is actually controlling which one to draw. You'll actually see on the widget switcher there's an active widget index, so I can change that to visualize that as well. So that's what's going to happen when this changes. So back in the graph on this widget, we need to make a custom function which actually changes that. So I can either make a custom event or a function. I'm going to do this as a function, so create new function. This is going to be a switch widget, or I'll call it switch cursor, just so it's more relevant to what we're doing. And then inside the switch cursor, in the details panel, which might be on the right hand side or underneath where I've put it. So I'll put it on the right hand side where it default shows. So in the inputs, I'm going to put is hand, and then from here we can basically select which widget to switch to, and we can call this function and tell it whether it should be the hand or not the hand based on any events from our player. So the widget switcher wants to set widget index to be either 0 or 1, so I'll do a selection, and I'll base it off of that is hand boolean, and then just drag these execution pins together. So if it is hand, it wants to be value 1, and I can double check that in the designer. If I set this to 1, it's the hand, and if I set it back to 0, it's the cursor. So I'll set it to 1 if is hand is true, and if is hand is false, it means it must be the default cursor, so it'll be set back to 0. So that's that function set up, and that's pretty much it here. Back in the player, on begin play, I want to create a new function to draw the widget. So I'll create a new function, draw cursor, and inside here we want to create a widget. It wants to be the new cursor that we made. We then want to set the size to be 16 by 16. We're going to set the alignment to be the top corner, so 0, 0, because cursors work from the top left. And then we're going to add that to the viewport. And lastly, we want to save a reference to this widget here. So promote that to a variable by right clicking on the return value, drag it over to the end of the execution, and drag the execution graph pin in. And then I'm going to name that on the right hand side, whilst it's selected, I can name that to my cursor. So I've got a reference to my cursor, and that means that I can call functions off it, like switch cursor. So there's that function, and I can change it to is hand or not is hand. So straight away I'm going to tell it to be not the hand, it's going to be the cursor straight away. So that's that. And then what I can do is save this, and you'll notice that I haven't set the position. That's because I'm going to be setting the position on tick, because every frame I want this to follow where the mouse is. So on event tick, whilst I'm changing my sprite based on my movement, I'm also going to get my cursor, set the position in the viewport to be equal to the mouse position. So the way that we can get the mouse position is by getting the player controller, pull off the return value, and get mouse position. So if I split the pin on set position and viewport and just drag these two in, should be able to save that, and if I hit play now, I should be able to see that cursor. So what we haven't done is actually call the function for draw cursor. So let's draw the cursor. You'll notice as I did that, I got all these errors which basically said access none, trying to get the property of my cursor inside set position in viewport. So if I click set position with the magnifying glass, it will take me to the problem. It says it's accessing none on this, and that's because we weren't calling draw cursor. So that's a little bit of debugging, so how that works. So now it's actually going to draw the cursor, and then when I press compile and save that, press play again, you'll see my cursor's just down there. It's quite small, it's quite difficult to see, so I might actually change the size of how that's getting drawn. So back inside the player, in my draw cursor function in the size, I'm going to set that to 25 by 25. So there we go, my cursor's a little bit easier to see now. And the next thing I want to do is show you how to do mouse over events so that you can see this cursor actually changing when we hover over specific actors. So first thing we need to do inside the player controller is set up the get player controller node here. So if we right click and get player controller, we want to set overlap events for the mouse to be true. So set enable mouse over events. So we'll set that to true. We can also set click events to true. Set enable click events. So basically what this means is any actors that have events that are tied to enable mouse over events or click events, such as this capsule collider. At the bottom here you'll see on clicked and on begin cursor over. These won't work unless the controller that's mouse is moving over the top of the object has these set to true. So we'll set those to true and we'll save that, and the next thing we need to do is go to our content browser and create a new actor. So I'm going to create a blueprint class, make an actor. This is just going to be called mouse tester. So if I go in here, I'll change the default scene root straight away to be a new scene root, so it gets rid of that default icon. And then I'll add a sprite to that, paper sprite. We don't have a sprite to put in here yet, so back in the content browser again, on the Pokemon tile map, what I can do to extract a sprite is right click it, sprite actions, create sprite, and I'll name this item. So if I click that now, you'll see it's got every single object in here. So if I edit the source region, I can now pick a sprite from here. So let's look at something that we might want our mouse to go over the top of. So I'll do one of these signs down here in the center. And the idea is that when our mouse goes over one of these signs, something's going to happen. So as an example, it's going to change the default cursor to be the hand. So just drag this down. We'll use the wide one. And we can double check that this is how we want it to look inside Edit Render Geometry. So if I zoom in on that, yeah, that's got the exact pixels that I want to use. So save that. Back in Mouse Tester in the paper sprite, if we select that item, so we called it item, yeah, there it is. So I'm going to double check the scale on this inside the level just by dragging that in. So I'll pull my content browser to the bottom here and drag Mouse Tester into the world. And we'll notice, based on that scaling that we've been doing to make the nav mesh work, that it's tiny. So I could either scale that here or scale it as default. So I'm going to scale it in its defaults. So I could rotate this. You'll notice that it changes the nav mesh, and we can tell things to affect the nav mesh or not affect the nav mesh, which I'll show you in a second inside the actor. I could either scale it here to be larger, or I could scale it in the actor. So I'm just scaling this inside the actor now, 4x4x4. Save that. Go back into the world, and you'll see now, yeah, it's a lot larger. So you'll also see that it's affecting the navigation mesh. In the paper sprite, you'll see can affect navigation. So if I tick that boolean, it should now go back to the level, and it's not affecting the navigation, which does mean that the player will be able to walk through it. So this might be desirable for things that you want to walk under, like objects that you wish to be on top of the player. But in this case, we do want the sign to not be traversable. So I'm going to go back there and put that back to true. Back on our nav mesh now, we'll see that the nav mesh has changed. We're not able to walk on top of that. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is some events for this object, this paper sprite, based on when the mouse enters it. So what we need to do is make sure that collision is enabled. So collision enabled is true. So that's usually going to help with any sort of like raycast mouse events or anything like that. And then down on begin cursor over, and I'm going to go back to that viewport, select that paper sprite again, and get mouse end cursor over. So in here we need to have a reference to our player to tell the cursor to change. So on event begin play, I'm going to get the player pawn that's currently playing the game. I'm going to cast this to our custom character, so it's my player in this case. Yours may be named differently. And then I'm going to get the cursor that he has and actually promote that to a reference. So it's target cursor. So this is the object I want a reference to. It's the cursor, not the player, that I'm interested in at this point. So now what I can do is, as the mouse goes over, I can get the target cursor and I can call switch cursor, and as it goes over, it wants to become the hand to show you that you can click this. And then I can just duplicate that, drag the target cursor in again, and as you exit the object, tell it to not be the hand. So if I press play now, you'll see as I hover over this object, the cursor changes to either be the hand or the regular cursor. So the next thing that we can do is set an on-click event for that. So in the paper sprite, go to the bottom, it's on-clicked. I'm just going to print to the screen. And what you could do is you could draw the town map when you click on that icon, for example. But this is just going to say hello. So I click that now. It says hello. So there you go. That's simple navigation. You'll see it also doesn't walk through the object with that navigation mesh. It's a simple mouse over, how mouse over can be implemented in your game. And click events. Another thing to be aware of before we close off this tutorial is inside the player controller you can also set touch events to be true and set touch over events to be true, and this is just in case you're working in a mobile project. So I drag these over, connect those execution pins together, and then go back to the new object that we made. In the paper sprite there should be input touch enter, input touch leave. So if I get touch enter and touch leave, and also on touch begin, which will be technically the click. So these two are pretty obvious. These are going to be the switch cursor events. So on enter, on leave, and then when the touch begins, so when we touch this, if we now hit play, get rid of the default mouse, you'll see now that that's working again. We can click that still, and this is sometimes more reliable if you're working in a mobile build, for example. So that will do for basic navigation and touch events. So hopefully you'll be able to make some awesome point and click stuff. Thanks very much guys, catch you next time.